Welcome to Stop Doing Stupid Stuff, the podcast where Tim Keefe and Andreas Wieman from Transform CX tackle the big questions shaping the future of work. In this episode, they dive into a hot topic inspired by Nirit Cohen's recent Forbes article, The Future of Less Work, Why People Get It and Organizations Don't. Together, Tim and Andreas examine why so many organizations seem out of touch with employees' evolving priorities and what a balanced social contract in the workplace might look like as we move forward. They'll discuss how companies are managing or missing the shift in expectations around autonomy, flexibility, and meaningful work. If you're ready to rethink how we work, let's jump into this episode.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another Stop Doing Stupid Stuff podcast with the amazingly talented Tim Keefe, who's about to embark on a 5-hour flight to Hawaii. So that's exciting. Maybe catch a nap or something. But Tim, what are we going to be talking about today? It's pretty I don't know. You're passionate about it. I'm passionate about it. I think it's going to be a good discussion.
Yeah, I wanted to get into, obviously there's a huge amount of conversation going on in the press, both online and print media, even on return to office mandates and what does that mean? And, what are we even asking from people at work? As you and I have talked over the last couple of podcasts, it seems like there's this big desire to measure attendance, which I guess is a good thing. But again, how does the fact that somebody came to a physical location 40 hours during that week, checked in, checked out, how does that tie back to what are we really getting done for our business? So I guess what I wanted to talk about today is kind of like this evolving definition of work or the social contract between an employer and an employee. I'm going to date myself here, but this was an expression that we used to use all the time, which was, a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. The implication being that I've agreed to do X for you. It could be 40 hours a week, it could be whatever. And then, and in exchange was that if I came and did that, but yeah, and I'm unloading trucks, for example.
Right.
And if I came and I unloaded the trucks and I did it in a way that was compliant with the work that you expected of me, I would get paid for that time. Yay, pretty straightforward, right? And the idea that you could do anything virtually just didn't exist at the time. All right, well now, roll the clock forward in not even that far ahead, but we're in the 90s. And, things like, oh, now we can do interactive voice response. We have DTMF or dual tone multi-frequency, which is the touch tone on a phone, enabled us to do things like go through a menu, pick 1 for service, 2 for sales, 3 for support, whatever it might be. Oh, well, geez, now I'm interacting with potentially, and that was the kind of the explosion of the contact center in there. There have been contact centers before, but nothing like what we were seeing with the evolution of voice over IP and voice over ATM solutions that now said, hey, I can answer a phone anywhere in the world.
Yep.
Whoa,
Agreed.
wait a minute. What do you mean answer a phone anywhere in the world? Yeah. And I can start to introduce concepts like a customer relationship management tool where in theory, all of the information about my relationship with this customer is available to any of my employees that needs it in the moment that they need it. And again, I'm talking the 90s here. We were talking about, hey, having PDFs in the hands of technicians so they could pull up, a PDA, actually, I should say, pull up whatever information they needed about that account, that house, that
Right.
whatever, without having to have that on paper and print it out and carried with them. Anyway, but what do you think? We keep coming back to this. What are we doing?
Right. Well, I think you hit on a lot of great topics there, and you opened with, from last week's podcast about measuring attendance. Like, look, measuring attendance is important, but it's like one out of a million things you should be measuring and balancing all of those out. So just showing up, I'm sorry, you don't get 100% credit just for showing up and getting FaceTime. That's the old, trying to think of the the G-rated analogy to use here of being in the right place at the right time so you have maximum visibility with the highest, most senior person at the company, and they're like,
Oh
oh man,
yeah.
he's always there. And
I used
like,
to used to call out people doing jumping jacks for the boss, that you never hear from them. And suddenly the boss is in the office and this
and they're
person is
there.
all over the place.
Yeah.
Like,
I got an
I was
analogy.
probably one of those people myself at one point, just to be honest.
It's funny. I always had the kind of opposite view of it. Like, I would see them and I would do I always did a head nod. I have no idea why. I always did like a head nod up, and then I would go about go about my business. And then I had leaders come up to me in some cases and say, "Hey, what do you do?" And like they would approach me. I kind of did a reverse psychology take on it. It was kind of interesting. Then again, if you've listened to the podcast, or I'm a unique individual in some of the logic that I have. Anyways, the path I was going down was complimenting where you started off and saying where work was and now where it's at today, right? And so now we're back post pandemic again, and we're trying to look at return to office. What is the feasibility of return to office? When we did all of the decision making and adjustments to make it through the pandemic, and now we're reverting back to pre-pandemic kind of logic when the world was kind of upended on itself and so many more choices are available for all levels of talent, from executives to entry level, as a matter of fact, right? And so now I think companies are going back to limiting their talent radii, right? When they go back to the office, because now it's within a 30 to 60 mile radius of the brick and mortar location. You're limiting your talent right there. And talent kind of
Yeah.
spread out all over the place during the pandemic because everybody, most people expected this was the new normal. This is how we
Yeah.
were adjusting. And I think the numbers kind of back up it worked if you did the model right. You didn't just take what you did in the office and tried to replicate that one for one over a Zoom session, which is pretty stupid if you did that. Like I'm calling you out and calling you stupid if you did that. Fight with me in the comments if you want to come on the
Well,
podcast and I'll talk to you about it.
I,
But
I, I think there was a lot of that because people didn't know what else to do. Um,
yeah, well, I
I
mean,
mean,
it's
management by walking around when you can't walk around gets really challenging. And especially if, like we saw right at the beginning of the pandemic, I mean, yeah, there were people who had been using Zoom for years and other virtual meeting tools, but now suddenly everybody needed to learn how to do it, grandma, granddad. And it was amazing. I was laughing to myself the other day that now everybody knows how to use a QR code. Well, in March of
yeah,
2020, not so many people knew how to use QR codes when
right,
everything blew up. But I guess the thing that like you and I were talking about is, I was just thinking as you were talking, right? Like there's this idea that we can just reset the clock back to, October of 2019 and it'll all be the same, right? Everybody
right,
will be working in an office, everybody will be commuting, nobody will be bitching about it. And yet that's not reality because in the 3 years of the pandemic, I think a lot of people went from this is how I have to work, which is what we'd always done, to holy crap, there's a whole new way for me to earn and
mhm,
learn and engage with the world around me. And for some people, they never want to go back. Um,
right. A lot of
now,
people,
and then for other people, they've changed their lifestyle. I mean, I
right,
was at a dinner the other night where there were a bunch of younger couples that were having, getting on to, they either have their first child or they're about to have their first child.
mhm,
And we got into a big, huge conversation about childcare and the cost of childcare versus
right,
the cost of going back to work. And you had these couples, both of them who are extreme professionals. We're talking PhDs, MBAs, very successful people each in their own right, and they're having to make the call that what, for us both to go back to work financially doesn't make sense
makes
because
sense,
of the costs of things like daycare. And we're not prepared that a stranger or a non-family member is going to raise our child. I mean, this
right,
was kind of the joke in New York, right? Like those of us who might have been around. But, you'd have these people who, God, I didn't know my child was fluent in Tagalog. And they go, well, why wouldn't they be? They spent,
so
7 or 8
much
hours
time,
a day of their growing up period of time listening to their nanny, who is, I mean, Filipino or Haitian or whatever.
right.
And it's actually kind of funny. And when you
Well,
think about these things, and then people have woken up and said, you know what, that's not how I want my child to grow up. And these people were sitting there going, yeah, we haven't decided who yet, but we know that one of us is going to be a stay-at-home parent. And that's a big, big, when you think about it, right? Like that, talk about, so we went through my parents' generation, and that was pretty typical, right? Like my mother was, a housewife, and
mhm,
she raised 7 kids. How she did that, I don't know, but probably lots of heavy drinking during the day. And then, then all of a sudden in my generation, the expectation was like, really, you both parents are professionals, you're both working. We were just very lucky. We had an extended family to take care of our children. But
right,
then you get now you're going back into the almost what it was in the 50s and 60s of, but wait a minute, we want to have family raising our children. Job is important, but is it so important that I'm not connected to my family?
Right.
And then the other thing, and I
Well,
mentioned this to
hold
you.
on,
Oh,
hold on. I want to
but
stay on this topic real quick though. But one, we're actually Tim and I were we look at several articles, as we go through and see how the market's responding and giving feedback and then interactions that we have with individuals at all levels. But there was a Forbes article published called "The Future of Less Work: Why Do People Get It and Organizations Don't?" by Nirit Cohen. And so I highly advise you guys to check that article out. It's a really good article. We'll link it in the posting here so you guys can check it out. But what Tim is talking about is what is important to the individual. That's the thing. We've actually gotten back to a level of prominence and focus on the individuals and the individuals having enough circumstantial choices given what's going on and the choices they have to be able to say, yes, you know what? Maybe both parents working, or even if you don't have kids, both people working in a relationship, we're spending too much time away from each other, and we don't like that. And so it was almost kind of culturally pushed in some ways and accepted as normalcy. And again, as we went through the pandemic and we got to spend more time at home with each other, even friends, and again, it don't have to be, married couples, but friends and the options you had to be able to game. A lot of gamers would game in the middle of the day because they were able to, but they were still able to log in and get their work done. And so this kind of gets back to what Tim was saying earlier about just looking at attendance in the return to office. But now you're once again upending people over the course of a short time frame, 2 to 3 years, right? Of being in an office, traditional, going work from home, living in the pandemic and all the stuff we had to go through with that, and now reverting back. And so that's a huge amount of change and shift in what you're asking individuals to do. And people that are coming into the workforce during that time frame, they know nothing else besides working at home. So
right,
all of it is foreign to them. And so now people are saying, you know what? We have more choices. We're going to do what actually makes us more fulfilled. And it's not
right.
always the job title. It's not always the salary that you're getting. It's balancing those things out of what is actual fulfillment. I feel something that I'm passionate about that I get to do, and I still have a job and a career that enables that either directly or indirectly, and I can still afford rent, I can afford necessities and things
Uh,
like that. That's what we're seeing emerge, and I agree with the article. I don't think a lot of organizations are
yeah.
adapting to that very well.
I think it's interesting because again, relatively recent conversation with a couple, and they were talking about it like they're almost deliberately wanting to be a quiet quitter at their work. The only reason
Yep.
they're working for the company they work for, or one of them works there, is for the medical benefit. And this gets into it. I really feel like if we had cost-effective healthcare in this country that I could buy as,
Yeah.
right, like as an individual, small business owner,
Right.
why can't I get a decent healthcare plan that is, reasonably priced, right? Like not
Right.
outrageously priced, but reasonably priced so that I can get decent healthcare. And the problem is you can't. I mean, I've tried, believe me, and the cost for a small, but even if you work with someone like the co-employment models like ADP has, it's still much, much more expensive than you'd want to believe. But it's why people are doing that. If I,
Yeah.
you kind of think if there was, I don't say we should have a national health service because it doesn't necessarily work that well in
Right.
countries that have it. But if we had more affordable healthcare, I think a lot more people would be independent. I think a lot of
Well,
people would go, you know what? I don't need to be a W-2 employee.
right.
I can do data annotation. I can be a graphic artist. I can be a technical writer. I'll
I
do
can work on
reaction
something.
videos in TikTok or whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
that seems to be an interesting gig. I'm going to have to try one of those one time. But, and the point being that I can do what I want, when I want, in the format that I want,
Yep.
and at the same time still have the broader life that I want, right? Like the constant social contract is changing to be, and I know no everybody I would say hate this, but it's not a very popular story, but it's the whole work-life balance, right? That somehow
Yeah.
that's bad, that I would want to be at every one of my kids' little league games, like
Right.
no, that's not bad. In fact, it should be the norm, not the exception. And
Agreed.
And why should it be, that, I mean, again, I was very fortunate because my, in-laws were still alive to take care of my daughters, but, you know, every family should have that option to be able to have their children raised in the way that they want them raised, not be forced into some of these circumstances. And I think the gig
Right.
economy is changing some of this stuff. And I think these big guys are going to get surprised when more and more people go, you know what? I can make 25 bucks an hour doing data annotation.
And be
Um,
happy. The important thing is balancing it out, like you said. They will be happy. And guess what? Exactly what you just said. Think about I want to go back to your example because I think it's a really good one about healthcare. Think about the statement of in your own personal experience and how many other millions of people are working just hard enough to not get fired so they have their medical insurance in the
yeah,
US. And so that's the level of productivity. But guess what? If you're a stupid company and you're just like, oh, well, Jonathan was in the office today, so he must be a good guy. He's here, he's committed. But you're getting 50% productivity out of Jonathan because he's really quiet quitting long enough to see his other options to work in a gig economy and work at home and still have his health insurance he needs. But like there's all kinds of unique situations that are occurring like that that companies kind of seem numb to. And like to me, it's just a big math equation. You just look at the variables. What are the variables? How have they changed? What is the level of productivity that you're getting outside of just attendance? But tying it back to if you're a publicly traded company, tying it back to your revenue generation and your cost. It's just mathematical equations. That's all that it is. But I think people kind of kid themselves and only look at what they want to look at, and then they convince themselves with
yeah.
confirmation bias of saying, no, this is the right thing to do, return to office, and I'll be damned. Everybody will just be back in the office. It'll be the good old days like it was, before COVID. And I don't, that's super naive. And
I don't think
I
the
think
days
it's
were that
wrong for
good
the
before
people.
COVID anyway, but yeah, no,
Yeah,
agreed.
agreed.
So and not to drag this out, but I think the bottom line here, kind of wrapping up is I really do believe that the new social contract for employment between an employer and an employee is very individualized. I
Yep.
think you have to look at the individual, you have to look at the business, you have to look at, I mean, it's a complex picture. But
Yeah.
what's really important is I think you have to start with we got to find a balancing point. It can't be all one way or the other. And now everybody has the right to do what they want. And companies like AWS who have mandated a return to office and have gotten a lot of noise in the press. Now, you could say a
Mm,
couple hundred people writing a letter against thousands of jobs is not a big deal. You go, yeah, you're right. But at the same time, it's the people you don't hear from, right?
right.
That are now going, oh, okay, that's fine. And maybe for a year, I'll do that while I look for something else. Or no, that's not going to work for me. And so I'm going to resign right away or whatever, right? Like there's a lot of that going on, or at least people saying that's what they're going to do. And
Yep.
I just say, and I can see it here. Like I live in San Francisco. It's, obviously there was a lot of doom loop conversation about San Francisco. And I'm not going to say we don't have some problems in some parts of the city, but tell me a city that doesn't. But what we are seeing is kind of as people are no longer clustered in the downtown corridors,
Mhm.
where all the lunch restaurants and everything else that served all those people who came into the office every day, as that has evolved, people are still eating, people are still, having their lives. They're just distributed more. And one of the areas that near me, which used to be kind of pretty sleepy, is now kind of becoming a cool little gourmet ghetto down there. Lots of,
Yeah.
small restaurants and places that are opening up throughout the week, cocktail bars, because people are like, yeah, I don't have to go 30 minutes downtown anymore. I'm working out here at home and I still want to go
Right.
out in the evening or I want to walk to the beach or whatever. And
Well,
other
and
people are saying,
that's
no, go
that's
ahead.
the thing. Like people find a way. They find a
People
way. If
find
you
a way.
give them
Yep.
autonomy and freedom and let that,
I think,
coexist together, they find a way to make it work.
you know what?
Time and time again, it's happened.
I think we should look at trademarking that one. People find a way. It goes with our manage in the moment kind of
Yeah.
viewpoint.
That's a good one. Although Jurassic Park may come after us for
I
Life
think,
Finds a
yeah,
Way. So, I don't know,
it was in
but
yeah, we'll definitely have to think about that one. But in any case, A great conversation as always. I think
Yep.
we don't have the answer yet, but I think the most important thing, and I would say this to any business owner or operator, is try to avoid making assumptions based on no data. Use
Yep.
data to make the right decision or try and do the best balanced decision you can for your organization. And I think each organization has to look at this uniquely to their personal, to their
Agreed.
individual needs.
Agreed. And then when you make the decision, continue to use data to measure how it's going and adjust from there. Don't just say, "Oh, I made a data decision. We're committed, and that's it. We don't look at data anymore. Now it's back to gut feeling only." Balance both of those out. Continue that to measure objectively and see how things are going, see what you missed, and make adjustments from there. I think that's probably the best advice that we can give at this
That would
point.
be
But
our pretty much our stop doing stupid stuff methodology, right? Use
yep,
data. All
exactly.
right. Well, sir, as always, wonderful to spend some time with you. And hopefully you have a great rest of your weekend. And wish the best for everybody's listening. Please, if you are interested in these topics, feel free to subscribe. We're looking forward to growing our fan base and would love to hear from you if you have other topics or guests you think we should have on the show.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. We appreciate you.